Hello, everyone. We are here today with Miss Andrea Jamison, Dr. Andrea Jamison.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you for
having me.
thank you for coming. You are a busy woman running your presidential campaign for ALA. So I'm just so glad that you were able to take a little bit of time and speak to our listeners and connect with me because honestly, you are just so amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I I heard of you before and I'm so happy that we were able to cross paths. And I started doing my research and I was like, Dr. Jameson is like really a boss.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You are honestly inspiring. And so, for our listeners who don't know you, will you introduce yourself and tell them like a little bit? I know you have a resume, a full dossier. But yeah, just kind of briefly introduce your role, what you do, for our listeners, and then we can talk a little bit more about your campaign as we get into the conversation later.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I am an assistant professor of school librarianship. I work at Illinois State University. I work with both pre service teachers as well as pre service librarians. I am also a PDS coordinator, which means that I supervise student teachers in their clinical teaching experience. Prior to working at Illinois State University, I also worked at Dominican, and I do teach at Dominican from time to time. And at Dominican, I work with graduate students who are working on their MLIS degree so that they can embark on careers as either public or academic librarians. And I feel like the list goes on. I am also, prior to working in academia, I used to myself be a school librarian. I was also a public librarian and I was an academic librarian. And
Wow.
so I like to share that because during this campaign, I think it's important to let librarians know that I really do understand all of the issues that librarians face across various sectors of librarianship.
That's amazing. So you are in the throes of librarianship, and I know you have seen some stuff,
Yeah,
observed
I
people, and
have. Yeah, I have about 20 plus years of experience. And, I started off in a classroom, so then I matriculated into libraries, and I felt like, wow, I really love it in this space. And then there were some things early on in my career that was very problematic for me because I worked in communities that were socially and economically depressed. While I loved libraries and the opportunities that I felt like I could do a lot in the library. So I started off as a classroom teacher and then I matriculated into school libraries. And it was a space that I fell in love with really early because I was an avid reader. However, there were some issues that I recognized early on. I had spent my early career working in schools that were in lower economic communities. And I recognized that it seemed to be a problem with having access to certain types of books on library shelves. And so that led me to do further research, which later led to my dissertation, The Train That Never Left the Station, to look at how libraries address diversity and equities in library spaces. And so, yeah, I've seen a lot.
that's amazing. So, were you always like a reader when you were younger, and was there a book that drew you to the library or an experience? And I think I know the answer to this. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So I was an avid reader when I was younger. However, I read a lot of different books, but I did not read a book by an African American author until I was about 14 years old. And that was a book, and it didn't come through my school or my school library. It was a book that a relative gave to me as a graduation present when I graduated from eighth grade. And the relative gave me three books. It was Asata Shakura, the biography of Asada. And I also read Their Eyes Were Watching God, and a book that I still love until this day, Mama Day by Gloria Naylor.
Oh,
I
right.
read all three of those books over the course of one summer, and it changed the entire trajectory of my life because up until that point, I had read books, that were authored by white authors. And I really didn't get a chance or have the opportunity to see myself in those books or to even understand that it was possible for a little black girl like me to be a writer. And so I was able to see possibilities for myself through reading those books. Their Eyes Were Watching God, that book left such an impression on me. I still remember the opening of that book, which says, "Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board." And I read that when I was 14 years old.
I love that book. When I used to teach 11th grade ELA, we would teach it every year, and I was just like, oh, hoping my kids would love it as much as I did.
Yeah, and that's the power of literature. And I think that's the power. That's why it's so important to have so many different types of books in schools and in libraries so that students can have the opportunity to connect with those stories that will really resonate with them. I often tell my students, especially the teachers, that the pre-service teachers that I'm working with, I'm like, students are either going to remember you for two reasons. Either you were a really great teacher or you were a really bad teacher. And I tend to feel the same way about books, right? Students are
Mhm.
going to either remember those books that really resonate with them because the stories are just so powerful and it speaks to them in just many different ways. Or they're going to remember, um, those stories that did not appeal to them in any type of way. So it's really important to make sure that all students have access to books that can speak to them.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue for the Coretta Scott King breakfast. Well, not just the breakfast, but the award. But I know you are heavily involved in all the processes. If I'm not mistaken, you were over the breakfast at one time, and now, lastly, you were on the jury for this year.
Yes, so when ALA had their annual conference in Chicago, which was a few years ago, I was the chair of the breakfast committee. Prior to that, I had served as a member of the breakfast committee. And it's a great experience because you really get to know the ins and outs of what it takes to put together such a prestigious award. And I am just so honored. I'm honored for so many different reasons. One, because I get to meet so many great librarians who are vested in really preserving the legacy and history of the Coretta Scott King Book Awards and the work that Mrs. Coretta Scott King did, and really just making sure that her husband's work and legacy of just peace and unity continued. And then, also just spreading that message through literacy for young children, young African American children. And so I love it. So after being the chair of the breakfast, I was later voted onto the jury, the Book Awards jury. And that is just, it is an amazing experience. And it's an experience I would tell people that if you're not involved in ALA, if you're looking for a space to get connected, to definitely try to connect with the CSK BART Roundtable or even EMERT. I was chair of EMERT, which is the Ethnic and Multicultural Information Exchange Roundtable. Those are just two really amazing groups to connect with. But the Book Awards jury is just tops. There's no other experience.
Is it easy to get into these things? Is it kind of like, I don't know, how easy is it for somebody to join or be a part of these different roundtables and these different juries and these different committees within ALA?
So it depends on a lot of different factors. You figure that juries or they only have a certain number of jurors that usually serve staggered terms. So with the CSK Book Awards, every year we have about 2 to 3 jurors that rotate on and 2 to 3 jurors that cycle that rotate off and 2 to 3 jurors that cycle on. So depending on the number of people that's interested, you have to go through a vetting process. So that can make it a little bit more competitive because the nominating committee, you have to go through a series of answering questions and then showing that you really, and one of the things, if you're interested, that you really want to do is you want to be able to show that you have experience in evaluating children's literature because the CSK Awards, you have to read hundreds of books. And reading those books, you really have to be able to identify what really is an exemplar of that represents the best of the best of African American children's literature according to the standards of the CSK Book Awards. So it can be a little bit competitive.
Well, a lot. That takes 2 slots. You got
Yeah.
to prove this like the Hunger Games for for these jury spots.
Yeah, these are coveted positions. And for, they're volunteer positions, but they're very coveted because the experience is just, you're never going to have another experience like it. You work very closely with other jurors. And again, you have the opportunity where publishers are sending you hundreds of books. So if you love to read, right, this is the creme de la creme. This is like the coup de grace. You get a chance to read new and exciting books that you may not have otherwise have been introduced to um, until you've been on a position like this because you're receiving so many different books.
And so when you after you read them, do you guys like meet and discuss them? Is there like a form you fill out, like reviews or like surveys?
Yeah, there is a deliberation process, and that deliberation process can take days, but it becomes very intensive discussions about the books. And of course, all of the jurors, we're giving like we have a very strict kind of rubric that we use to kind of discuss each of the books by, and and it sometimes it becomes very um, these
Heated.
discussions can go, yeah, heated discussions because you have so many good books. And so just imagine reading hundreds of good books and you're coming to a table with with people who have different perspectives on those books, and you have this kind of guideline and you're going through these questions, and you essentially, you're placing these books under a microscope,
Yeah.
and and it becomes a very, very intensive process, but it's very rewarding, and I'm going to tell you why it's rewarding.
It's like the ultimate book club.
It is the ultimate book club and the ultimate discussion club. So you have to make sure that when you come to that discussion, you're able to say no on this page, and
Ooh.
it gets very heated. But I'm going
Yeah.
to say this: and of course, the book awards are announced. The winners are announced at the YMAs, the Youth Media, the U Media Awards, at which was formerly at Live Learn X. But what is great is that you have so many different awards that come together and they announce the winners. And one award committee don't necessarily talk to another awards committee. But the feeling that we get when we select a book, when we agree upon a book for a particular award, and to see that maybe Caldecott or Newberry also selected that award, and we have not talked to each other and we don't even know what books are being considered, that is like, we knew it. We knew that was a great book. It's
Wow.
like,
I never even thought about that.
yeah, so it makes that deliberation process, even though it is intensive, even though we spend long hours in it, when we come out of it and we see that other books, the books that we've selected or that made the cut, are selected by other jurors, we're like, okay, we were on the right path, or we were in sync in thinking that these books do represent the exemplars. And what's even better, when we look at that mock sort of book awards list that they put out with the youth, and then when we go back and look at the books that kind of make the cut, and then we say, okay, students are actually thinking along the same lines, we feel good about the work that we're doing. I mean, it's just a phenomenal experience. And then the breakfast, right?
Yes. That is so
Yeah,
cool. An intense experience, and I know that your campaign has been an intense experience as well.
yeah.
Um, So tell us about your running. Why did you want to run? Where did this come from?
So so aside from me just having experience in librarianship and just being very cognizant of the issues that librarians face, we're really living in a time right now where I think it's very important for us to have, for the American Library Association to have a leader who is going to address our current social and political climate in relationship to how it impacts libraries. That's important to me because I'm an educator. I am working with pre-service librarians and pre-service teachers, and we're constantly having discussions. And we have some really intense discussions. And I hear a lot of the apprehension or the concern about even moving into this field of librarianship. And I know myself as an instructor, I am asking students to be, when they get into this field, to be advocates, to advocate for intellectual freedom. And my motto has always been, I will never ask students to do anything that I'm not willing to do for myself. So I in a sense, feel this obligation to my students to make sure that the field that I am preparing them to go into, that one, I have been a good steward of that field so that I know that I am passing along something to them that they can feel good about going into. And another thing is that because they're newer,
Hmm.
a lot of them, they don't have the language to advocate. They may not even feel secure because there's so much backlash that librarians are experiencing in terms of losing their job, especially school librarians. And I want to say this, I am standing completely in solidarity in this election with school librarians. So they may feel as if they don't have the voice and they don't have the ability to effectively advocate. I've been in this industry over 20 years. I'm in my 50s. I know that I have the voice and I know that I have the experience. And so I feel like those of us that can advocate, I'm advocating from a certain position of privilege, and I want to use that privilege to make it easier for the librarians that are coming behind me and for those that don't have that voice to advocate for themselves. So that's why I'm running.
That's amazing. And honestly, once you said that you're in your 50s, I kind of zoned out because I was like, wait, what? Y'all said
Yeah,
Dr. Jameson? Oh my goodness.
I am in my 50s and I am
You
reminded
look
of it every
great.
time. Thank you. But every time I go to the doctor and they're like, your blood pressure, you're this, I'm like, okay. So I am reminded of it.
Oh
But
goodness.
yeah, so that's how I got here. And then of
Hmm.
course I had some members of EMERT. I was a two-term chair of EMERT, and I had members say, you should really consider running for ALA president because I've had people share with me, we really appreciate the work that you have done in EMERT, and we think that library, the organization could benefit from that. And so that was inspiring for me, and that was sort of a motivation for me as well.
What are some of your goals or like initiatives, your platform or vision to support ALA as president? And how will that impact school librarians?
So first and foremost, I am very big on advocating for pro library legislation and protections for all library workers. Again, the reason being is because we live in this climate, this social and political climate where the very mention of certain terms like DEI, right, is viewed as divisive. And then you have issues of censorship that really targets marginalized communities, specifically African Americans and LGBTQIA+, if we look at the data from the Office of Intellectual Freedom. And so, because of that, I think it's going to be important for us as librarians to be very proactive in trying to address these issues, not reactive. I think that in libraries historically, we have done well when we have listened to the needs of our communities and not when we have ignored them. And so, because of that, I feel as if we historically we have had the Library Bill of Rights, which are, and I talk about this in my book, Decentering Whiteness in Libraries. The Library Bill of Rights are guidelines that really interprets what First Amendment rights look like within library settings. The problem is, and this is why the Library Bill of Rights has been criticized, they're not enforceable. So they do little in terms of really protecting librarians. And so I feel that in order for us to really thrive and to really make sure that we are going to survive over the course of the next 10 years, we need pro-library legislation because we have anti-library and librarians legislation. So that's my first goal. My second goal is to definitely combat this misinformation that has been perpetuated about librarians. And that is the fact that librarians, provide youth specifically with access to obscene materials, right? And I'm constantly telling my students that, a lot of that comes from people's perception of what obscenity is. We all have different values and morals as it relates to what we might feel is objectionable. And people have a right to have access and to not have access to what they feel that is objectionable to them, but they do not have the right to limit access for someone else. And when that term obscenity is thrown around, only the courts can decide what is obscene and not obscene. And so I think it's going to be important for us to get the message out to our patrons to let them know that we are very intentional about how we select books and we follow our professional obligations and our guidelines. More importantly, we're willing to work with parents and community members. If they do not want to read a certain book, they do not have to read that book. Right? But we also need to spread the message of the value and the access of making sure that all of our patrons have representation in the library and access to a wide range of materials. And then lastly, and this is a big one, outside of just, again, supporting school librarians, but fiscal transparency in the American Library Association.
Just
I
period.
I don't know how deep I need to go into that.
That's
I will just say
crazy
this.
to me.
Um, I am a member of, I owned a condo, and I'm a member of an association. And I have learned in being a member of an association that when you have um, a board or when you have members that have access to a lot of power to make decisions on behalf of a large body of people, that it is important for the large body of people that they're representing to be informed about the financial decisions that are being made, specifically when that entity is depending upon funding that's coming from the members. And
Mm.
so I think, you know, that is something that I definitely want to advocate for. The American Library Association always the presidents put out the state of libraries, and that's usually just a booklet. And I'm proposing that we move beyond that because we got to start having conversations for transparency. And I think that state of libraries need to be put out in a booklet form, but it also needs to be a town hall discussion. And it also needs to be a discussion about the state of finances because I need, as a member, to make sure that if I am investing $300, $400 annually into this organization, that this organization is fiscally solvent, right? That the people that are making the decisions are making the best decisions for this organization and for our fiscal solvency over the next 15, 20 years. And then I want to be a part of that discussion. I want to have the opportunity to hear the decisions that are being made. And I want to be able to ask questions. And I think we need to afford that to all of our members.
You mentioned how your new librarians that you teach don't have the confidence the knowledge to speak to advocating for themselves all the time and how you're trying to equip them with that. What advice do you have for librarians who, may not have that confidence or are nervous about what's happening in the country regarding um, books, diversity in books, and maybe self censoring themselves. Just like, what advice do you have for librarians?
That's an excellent question. The first thing I think is important is that I think all librarians have to understand the harm of censorship and really understand what our professional obligations are. And this is an analogy I use with my students. When I was younger, I read a lot of books that were not representative of the African American community, and it did not represent African Americans in a positive light, right? I can name those books like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, right? The language that was in those books and how looking back now was very demeaning to myself and to my sort of self-efficacy as an African American young female, listening to language that was kind of derogatory. As a librarian, I could be tempted to censor those books based off of my personal feelings or my belief systems, but I don't, because I recognize that as a librarian, I have a professional obligation to select books that reflect the mission of the organization or the institution that I'm in, and also the selection criteria for that particular library. So that's first and foremost. I think it's important that if you're going into this field, you have to understand and really be committed to your professional obligation. Secondly, I would say, and this is something that I think is important for library organizations like the American Library Association. I'm telling students, join an organization that's going to be very important to your professional development, into networking with librarians who have that experience and who can share their knowledge with you. But on the other side, I think as an organization, we have to make sure that we're doing, those of us that are in leadership, that we're doing our due diligence to reach back to those newer librarians and to make sure that we're preparing them. We have to do more than just giving them these toolkits and put it on the website, right? My students tell me all the time, we've read the Library Bill of Rights over and over again, but we don't understand it. So giving them that professional development and giving them lots of opportunities so that they can develop that language. And again, joining the organization, making sure that they feel prepared and knowing what their obligations are as a librarian.
I love that you mentioned the sense of community among other librarians. So, like joining your state organization, getting involved with ALA, and really making those connections. Like, I know my PLN has given me so much confidence moving through, being a school librarian today. Of course, you're the only one in your building usually. So,
Absolutely, yeah.
to have a network, that you can reach out to with questions. And I actually just emailed Nan Brown, the GLMA advocacy chair today, and was like, "So, tell me about what's going on in my district." And just having those relationships. Shout out to Nan. It's good to have somebody to lean on. Like if I didn't know her, then I might be like, okay, I can reach out to my coordinator, but I know she's busy. So making those connections is invaluable.
Yeah, those connections are definitely important. And I know that there are a lot of mentor mentee relationships that happen in librarianship. I just think that um, those organizations, those roundtables, divisions, or state chapters that sponsor mentor mentee relationships, it is incumbent upon us and within those organizations to make sure that those relationships are effective, right? To make sure that there is opportunities, significant opportunities for mentors and mentees to connect, and that the people who are mentors are actively reaching out to the mentees, and that there's a reciprocal relationship. So making sure that there's kind of oversight in that area to make sure that those relationships are effective.
Right. And so I know that your students see you as a mentor. How else do you kind of encourage them to go beyond the classroom and to build relationships outside of school?
I think that is so important. And one of the first things that I tell them is that they have to seize every moment, and especially if they're a school librarian, you have to seize every moment in the day to try to have conversations with teachers, informal conversations, because that's when those kind of collaborations that can happen. It's important for a school librarian to be, in my opinion, embedded in every aspect of the school environment. And so you have to do a lot of relationship building. I also recommend that And this was just me when I was a school librarian, because you can tell by this podcast, I like to talk. So it was important for me to ask the principal, right, to get on various committees within the school. So I was on a technology committee because I wanted to know what was happening in the school and how I can best support it in the library in terms of making sure the collection is there, in terms of facilitating those needed information literacy skills. But also, and you mentioned this, we're oftentimes by ourselves. And I was in schools where I had principals that would say, okay, um, I want you to attend grade level meetings with the gym teacher. And every week you all are going to get together and meet. And that was great. But I had to have conversations with my principal and say, I really would like to meet with the grade level teams so that I can know what's happening at second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. So if they're working on a unit of fairy tales or folk tales, I can pull those books and resources. If they're doing something on the solar system, I can support them on American Revolution. So I'm always telling librarians or my students, you have to really get out there. Being a librarian is a leadership position. It's not you're just in the classroom working in your own little microcosm. You actually have to get out there and network, go beyond the school, meet everyone in the school, find out what the committees are, be a part of those committees, because you are supporting the mission of the school, and the work that you do undergirds the curriculum. And then go outside, right? Partner with the public librarian, which is why I'm running, because I see opportunities for us as librarians to partner. If we are going to face what's happening in society right now, we're going to have to do it together, right? Which means that academic school, public, special librarians, we're going to have to work and partner together, and also maybe start even reaching out to schools and partnering with schools because we have a vested interest in curriculum. So I think that's going to be very important for us.
It's so funny you mentioned meeting with the teachers because I'm at a brand new school, and so I started going to some of the meetings, some of the planning meetings, and they're like, why are you here?
Okay.
What are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm just here to add my 2 cents and to see what you guys are doing. So now they're kind of like, being more receptive. But at first,
Yeah.
I was just like, why is she here? So you guys, if you're somewhere and they look at you funny, it's okay. They'll get used to
Yeah, it's normal. And sometimes it's the effect because if you're coming behind another school librarian, you don't know the relationship that school librarian has had with the teachers. And sometimes the teachers deal with you based on their experience with the prior school librarian. So you have to come in like tearing down walls, like, oh no, I'm
it.
different. And so yeah, you have to
I promise
really.
I'm gonna keep the library open. People can come in.
Right. And I want to work with you. I don't want to take over. I really
Right.
want to facilitate a collaborative relationship. And I'm big on collaboration. And I know we didn't really talk about this, but I'm also big in representing the voices of diverse communities, which is very important because if we think about the history of the American Library Association, ALA didn't do a great job with that. I could talk about the history in the early 1920s of the Work with Negroes Roundtable that was formed to try to think about, to address the needs of African American librarians. The problem was there were no African Americans on that roundtable. And so, because of that, African American librarians, they really were subjected to a lot of unhealthy situations within the organization. And so, because of that, if I were elected as president of the ALA, it is vitally important for me to make sure that all voices, especially those in underrepresented and marginalized communities, are brought to the table and those voices are heard. We got to have some difficult conversations. I can tell you, Lauren, I've had librarians come to me and say, hey, these are my experiences, but I can't get to council. And when I bring it up, I'm shut down. No one really wants to talk about it because they feel like it's too political, it's too controversial, and we need to be neutral as libraries. Everyone knows my point of view. Libraries are not neutral spaces because we represent democracy, and democracy is not neutral.
Mm. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Right. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you my ending question. What are you reading?
What am I reading right now? So, I just came back from Live Learn X, and I had to. I moderated a session with author Nick Brooks. Shout out to Nick Brooks,
Yes.
phenomenal author, author of the book Promise Boys, and Promise Boys. Promise Boys is just an excellent, excellent book. But I also received an arc of Up in Smoke. So
His
I
brand
am
new book. Yeah.
currently, yeah, I am currently, I read Promise Boys about a year ago, and I read it again on the plane. I spent 3 hours on the plane, and I read the entire book. It was that good. And so now I've just started Promise Boys. So I have that sitting by my bed, and it's like, that's my next book.
And Up in Smoke.
Up in Smoke. And then it's so funny because I co-read with my son, and we listen to audiobooks all the time. And so at night sometimes we cuddle up and we'll listen to an audiobook. And by far the audiobook that I have on rotation is drum roll.
Mm.
It is Bud Not Buddy.
Oh.
We have that book on rotation. We absolutely love it. So that's one of the books that I kind of co-read with my son, or we co-listen
I'm
to.
gonna make sure that I share those. Again, Dr. Jamison, I'm so grateful. Before I let you go, is there anything that you'd like to share? Where can our listeners find you? How can they connect with you? When does voting happen? What's up with the election?
Yes. So voting will happen in March. And so ALA will send out a news blast via ALA Connect. So please look out for that. But by the end of March, you should be voting. You
Okay.
can find more information about me at www.andreajamison.com. And I'm online. I am my social media. I am on Threads, and I'm also on Instagram. I pulled out of X for many different reasons, but and I'm A Shy Town J on those platforms. I've done a TED Talk. My book, Decentering Whiteness in Libraries Through Inclusive Managed Collection Management Practices, is available online. I am currently, I was asked to submit a proposal to Harvard. So I may have another book coming out about intellectual freedom. And so, yeah, TED Talk. I've done a lot of different things. I've been around, and I hope to be around for a while longer, much longer, to continue doing this work.
Well, we are standing behind you. I'm standing behind
Thank you
you.
so much.
And when you are president of a we are so grateful to have you on this podcast. Thank you. This has been
Thank you.
such an inspiring talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you to your listeners for even just pressing play and giving me the opportunity to share the platform and the vision. And I say this, I don't know if it's a thing yet, but I feel like if people were to ask me, why should I vote for you? Um, I think a vote for me is a vote for democracy, and libraries represent the cradle of democracy, according to Andrew Carnegie.
Thank you so much. Chef's kiss.
Thank you.